co-founder of technology giant Apple has predicted that Bitcoin will more than double in the price based off of market speculation alone. Speaking on the Wild Ride of Steve-O podcast, Steve Wozniak said that he has personally experimented with cryptocurrency, but is not in it to make money. Just recently, I think that Bitcoin is going to go to 100,000, Wozniak told the podcast. So at this point in the article, great stuff. A lot of people are reading this and saying, oh, wow, Steve Wozniak thinks $100,000. This must be really good. This is where it gets a little hairy. He says, I don't know where I get that theory. I can't put any mathematics to it. I just really feel it from all the interest in crypto. Is Steve Wozniak a crypto noob? Because that sounds like what a crypto noob would say.
I actually, it is as funny as it is to knock on his reason, I think he's actually onto something here. And I think you got to think about like the wisdom of a child. Well, how often have you heard a child who's like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old just say the most profound thing in the world because they don't know anything? Like, they don't understand the world. They don't have all these mathematics and formulas and charts and all this stuff in their head to confuse them. They just got common sense. They're like, hey, that looks like this. Never thought about that. I always overcomplicated it. I guess you're right, little Jimmy, who's 4.5 years old. I think what Wozniak just said is actually a funny reason, but I also don't want to be prideful and say, oh, well, I have so many better reasons. I have better charts than you. I have better on-chain than you. I have better fundamentals than you. At the end of the day, market sentiment is what drives Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, so I actually think his reason here is the most profound reason that Bitcoin will go to $100,000. What did he say? I have the article right here. I just lost it. Let me pull it up really quickly. Let me read the direct quote. He said, I don't know where I get that theory. I can't put any mathematics into it. He's basically saying, I ain't got an idea what the technicals and the fundamentals say. I'm not knocking technicals and fundamentals. I read them every day. They're very important. I'm not saying that that's irrelevant. I just really feel it from all of the interest in crypto. And I think he's actually right. I think we are going to go to $100,000 based almost not based purely on the interest in crypto, but I think that is one of the main driving factors and one of the main indications that we are, because the amount of people that are interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency right now is astronomical. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the reason is because Bitcoin was founded on principles for a purpose to help people. We've talked about all of this. But I want to talk about some of the reasons why Bitcoin is going to go to $100,000. But I actually think, even though he doesn't admittedly know really why, I think he actually hit on the most important reason, and that is because there is an absolute plethora of interest in crypto. Now, let's back up a little bit and talk about why that interest is there. So I'm going to be brief on this because we've talked about it before. The reason that there's so much interest in crypto, I say, falls into two camps. Number one, you have people in the first world who want to make a bunch of money. They want to become rich. There's a lot of money in the first world. You got to realize that. The United States alone makes up a quarter of the entire globe's GDP. The European Union makes up another quarter of the world's GDP. Those two blocks, that country and that block combined make up half of the world's economy. There's a lot of very wealthy people in those nations that are very interested in Bitcoin and have poured collectively billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into crypto. But there's actually another segment of people invested and interested in cryptocurrency. And those are people that are disillusioned or otherwise disenfranchised with their local banking and monetary systems. I'm talking about the people of Afghanistan that have no way of storing wealth into the future. Their banking system's completely collapsed. What, are you going to go buy land and have it seized from you? What could happen to it? There's no way to store wealth in a nation that is war-torn. In Syria, in right now Ukraine, in Russia, where the ruble's dropping 35% in the span of a month, in all these different nations where there's hyperinflation going on. In Zimbabwe, we're talking about Venezuela, we're talking about El Salvador now. El Salvador wasn't experiencing hyperinflation because it's dollarized, but they were disenfranchised with the banking system. It took them 100 years to get 2.5 million people online on the banking system. They got that many people online in cryptocurrency in 3 weeks. I interviewed the man that did it down at the North American Bitcoin Conference. So there's a second cohort that is investing in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and those are the people that need Bitcoin because they have nothing else. And that is a very, very large segment of the human race that we're talking about. We're talking about probably 2 billion people that in time will realize that Bitcoin is the only way for them to actually store wealth into the future and preserve wealth from physical attack and theft. There is a lot of interest in crypto, and for good reason, because I believe that Bitcoin was the most revolutionary, most impactful idea and solution to the biggest problem in the 21st century that humankind has ever faced financially, and that is that financial sovereignty always had to be in the hands of a trusted third party called a bank or called an employer or called a lender. Now it can be in the hands of us. That's why I do believe Bitcoin will go to $100,000 and far more. But now let's talk a little bit about his prediction of $100,000 and what will stop Bitcoin, or excuse me, what stands in the way of Bitcoin getting to $100,000, and some of the things that we're going to need to see knocked down, some of the roadblocks we're going to need to see knocked down before Bitcoin does get to 100K, because I think it's virtually inevitable that it will indeed happen. So, Tim, what are some of your biggest reasons why you think it's going to, not the reasons you think it's not going to go to $100,000, but what are some of the biggest roadblocks you see in getting there?
Well, I listening to what you're saying, I'm trying to listen to your take. Also, what Steve Wozniak is saying, I have an agreement and a disagreement with the concept. Now, if he is talking about interest from institutional investors, then I might actually have to say he has a point here. That's not the feeling I got. And I when we say there's a lot of interest coming in the crypto space, I disagree with that statement. I actually think interest is leaving the crypto space. I don't think it's though because crypto is a bad thing or is not working. I do believe we're going to see that interest come back in, especially as we see things go downhill economically. But there are two big factors right now that are hurting not just U.S. economics, because a lot of times I think we're tempted to just think about U.S. citizens and what their views are, but we're seeing a lot of things that trickle from what affects the U.S. economics into the rest of the world. The first thing is what we see happening right now with war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. That is a world economic problem. That affects almost every single country, because what happens with oil, what happens with all of the, what Ukraine can produce food-wise, what Russia produces oil-wise, with sanctions on Russia and Ukraine being stifled, that affects every single economy in the world, right? That's the first thing. So now we have retail investors who, as much as they would love to be invested in thinking and growing their education in crypto, you got to first worry about, do I have food to eat today? Do I have a roof over my head? Am I going to be able to provide for my family? That concern has to come first, and it's going to. Then you throw on top of it the US dollar, which is kind of the staple fiat currency that a lot of other currencies kind of base themselves off of. When we see the dying of the US economy and the US dollar, that affects other economies as well. That's one of the reasons why El Salvador, for example, decided to leave the US dollar and go to Bitcoin for their currency. Here's the problem, though. As we see these two things happening, and again, it affects the United States citizens very much so, but there's a trickle effect. It affects everybody, and the average retail investor is going to be forced to stop thinking about crypto for a second and actually think about their food. Now, there's a lot. I'm not saying that's going to happen to everyone. Obviously, I would imagine we have 1,800 people watching here. You guys are crypto enthusiasts. Even though you guys are going to go through a struggle because the rest of the world is going through a struggle economically, you're going to continue to hold to and know and see the future and saying, I'm going to go ahead and deny myself some of these needs right now and these desires right now to invest in my future. And that is awesome. We need more of it. But if we're speaking just realistically, what are the chances that actually happens? I don't see that happening over the rest of the year. So if we're going to rely on retail interest to raise Bitcoin to $100,000, I think we're putting our money in a boat that's going to sink. I don't think that price is coming from retail investors. I actually think that's the case for sideways or bear market movement from the Bitcoin price. Where I do, though, put the point of like, hey, what's stopping us from $100,000? At this point, retail investment. We know that. That's probably going to continue the rest of this year, at least until we see what happens, come to a conclusion with the war in Europe. But the other thing is regulation bringing institutional investments in. Can we see something happen this year with regulation that allows those billions of dollars from institutions to come in? That is also keeping us from $100,000. But the minute that's solved, this is the perfect season. We talked about it this morning, Jeb, during our planning meeting.
Yep.
Manipulation. The whole purpose of manipulation in markets is to get all of the retail investors out of the space so that whales and institutions can get all of the supply and then skyrocket the price, making themselves money. What we see happening with interest rates and this war, they don't have to manipulate anymore. The news, the headlines of what's happening in the world, that's getting all the retail investors out. This will allow for the institutions to make money, and that could bring us on $100,000 Bitcoin price by the end of the year. But if you're asking what's stopping us from 100,000, it's retail interest actually dropping, and it's institutions waiting to see what regulation actually is going to look like.
And I think it's very important that we realize that when you're in the US dollar, when you're in the stock market, when you're in the real estate market, and I'm going to directly quote Michael Saylor here. I've been studying him quite a bit as I'm interviewing him tomorrow. I like to be very prepared for these big interviews. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm interviewing him today. I'm interviewing him in like 3 hours. One of the things he said is that when you're on a sinking ship, shuffling deck chairs on the sinking ship doesn't really help you all that much, does it? Because the ship is still sinking. He's talking about everything that's based on the US dollar. So we're talking about the real estate markets, the stock markets, the bond markets, the precious metal markets, oil markets, anything in the basket of goods that the CPI measures, all of that is attributed and ascribed to the US dollar. Bitcoin, however, is not. It does not get its value, and it is not denominated, and it does not go back to the value of the US dollar, where if the US dollar collapses, Bitcoin does. Now, if the US dollar collapses, it's going to cause a big problem in the global financial markets, and that's going to lead to FUD, which is going to collapse the price of Bitcoin short term. But long term, Bitcoin was designed as the solution to this problem. So shuffling deck chairs on a sinking ship is relatively useless. You kind of got to jump ship and get on another boat, and that's what Bitcoin is. It's another boat that is rock solid and is completely and totally indestructible, incorruptible, and immutable. That's why we invest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So, is Bitcoin going to go to $100,000? Yes, absolutely it is. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion, unless there's a better technology. But guess what? Bitcoin was first to market. There is no better technology that has first to market advantage. Everything else that has even tried to be like Bitcoin, Dash, Monero, Litecoin, any one of the cryptocurrencies that is used as a long-term asset-based store of value has failed because Bitcoin does a good enough job and it has all of the market dominance. When Bitcoin goes into a major rally, it is going to be because more people realize, okay, Bitcoin, yes, is volatile, but Bitcoin was made for a bigger reason. I am going to shout this from the rooftops until every person on the planet understands that Bitcoin is the solution to the biggest financial problem that we have had in the history of modern civilization since the advent of agriculture. And that is, if you want to build a society, then you have to have a centralized third party that runs things. That's called a government. It started whenever you saw people having little towns of 50 people. Somebody's got to be in charge or the whole thing breaks down. Now with finance, you can have a trustless software-based third party that is called the Bitcoin network that's completely incorruptible, immutable, and intrinsically neutral. It's not going to attack you because, oh, I don't like you or I don't like you. Bitcoin doesn't have an opinion. It's not going to come for you. And because of its nature of being able to be completely restored from one node, and there's millions of nodes around the world, even in the event of a nuclear war, Bitcoin's network would still survive if it had one computer that had power turned off and was still in existence. Why is Bitcoin going to go to $100,000 and a lot higher? It's going to go there because of the reasons it was built and because of the absolute revolutionary methodology that it was built on. I'll just run through some of the roadblocks to get there first. War in Ukraine. We have interest rate uncertainty. Now we have interest rate certainty, but there's uncertainty about what the interest rates rising is going to do to the stock market. We also have the inflation of the US dollar, which in the long term proves the point of Bitcoin, but also scares people and wants people to hold on to their assets so that they don't go broke, basically is what it is. Because of a lack of education, people don't realize that Bitcoin is actually that other ship that they need to jump to. A lot of people are still doing the shuffling of the deck chairs kind of deal. They need to realize that they got to get off the boat. It's an education problem. It's going to take 10 or 20 years for people to really understand and get the paradigm shift in their mind about what Bitcoin is and why it's there. That is one of the barriers to $100,000. We're also looking at technical barriers. We have, for example, the transactional throughput of Bitcoin. A lot of people still see Bitcoin as the future of currency. At this point, unless Lightning Network does something completely revolutionary, really don't think it's going to end up being massively used for currency. It is really going to be used for asset. And by the way, that's a $100 trillion market right there, so don't think that that's going to stifle the growth of Bitcoin. It's not. Bitcoin does have things stopping it from going to $100,000. Do any of them change why Bitcoin was made, the solution, or do any of them stop the problem that we see Bitcoin is solving? No. The problem is that any company, any cryptocurrency has to have a problem that it's the solution to for it to be successful. What's the problem? Other people have control of your finances and you do not have financial sovereignty, because of the way that the money of the world is set up, because of the way the banking system of the world is set up. Number one, the problem is only getting worse. So the solution only becomes more valuable. Has Bitcoin stopped being the perfect solution to that problem? It has not. In fact, it has only been exemplified as the near perfect solution to one of the biggest financial problems that humanity has ever known. That right there is why Bitcoin is going to go to $100,000. Seriously. Simple. Everything else is dressing on the icing of a cake. The core is that there's a problem that Bitcoin solves, and it's a $100 trillion problem, and Bitcoin does a great job of solving it. That's why it's going to go to $100,000. And Steve Wozniak hit it on the head when he said that he feels like it's going to go there because of interest. You know why people are interested? Because amazing solutions like that get interest from the world.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, you should definitely consider subscribing because we're trying to help you become financially free in these cryptocurrency markets. And also, consider following us on Twitter @CryptoJeb for more updates on the price of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Peace.